Michael, welcome to the show. How are you, buddy?
Lovely. Thanks, Travis. All good.
Excellent, excellent. Now, mate, you're a parenting expert. Is that what you put it like when you've just come in from Sweden from pre-coronavirus from Copenhagen? What do you put on your inbound card when you're coming back to Australia, or what do you put on your card on your visa there? How do you describe yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on who's there, I guess. I describe myself as a parenting educator. So,
There you go.
yeah, so parenting educator, and the reason why I go for that tag is we all like a tag, and so people understand that. I
Yep.
feel I'm a bit uncomfortable with the expert bit, but I'm a teacher by trade. So I began teaching too many years ago, and
Yep.
about 15 years ago, I did some research on a Master's of Education. I did it on parenting education.
Okay.
And what I sort of found out, a simple thing I found out what made strong families work, which at that particular time. And so I turned it into a book. And then from there, it was before the day of the parenting expert, I guess. I was sort of, these are the days with pre-internet, etc. And there really wasn't an industry as well. So in the early 90s, I wrote columns for Murdoch Press and also for Fairfax, which was not at the same time, and different magazines, and then gradually moved into the speaking business, wrote books. And then basically how I've done it is most of my books have been in an area where I think there's a need, and I sort of get a bit of expertise in that area, and then we move on from there. So I've been giving presentations for about 20 years. Everyone likes to know we always talk about what's the best thing we've done or how many audiences. I guess my claim to fame was first person to give a parenting presentation or seminar to federal politicians in Parliament House, Canberra.
Oh, wow.
In 2004, which was cool. And that kicked
off. Where'd you do that one?
An actual government Parliament House.
Oh, wow.
So that was amazing. And that started off a year-long, well, it's actually 2-year-long national tour around Australia, sponsored by the federal government, but the federal government gave it to an organisation called the Australian Childhood Foundation.
Okay,
so,
cool.
And it kicked it off with that. So the first one was that in Parliament House, which was an amazing experience. It was really, really interesting.
Would have been amazing.
So
how many books have you authored on parenting?
11 and one I have co-authored, so
cool.
Which was the last one. So I guess to give people a bit of a flavour, my original area is in what I call family management, and it moved into behaviour management, how we can manage difficult kids, which came from my teaching background. I've written one for fathers about 20 years ago when I realised that mums and dads do things differently, and that was
Send us a copy.
Send you a copy. I think I'm going to revamp that. One on birth order as well. So I'm fascinated by the notion of birth order and how that impacts. Various ones, and then most recent one was a book called Anxious Kids, which was probably the most personal one I've ever written, and I co-wrote it with a colleague, Dr. Jodie Richardson, which was a great experience. And why I found that was almost cathartic, because it wasn't until in my late 50s that I found that I had anxiety. I've always had anxiety, but I functioned with it. And my co-author, Dr. Jodie Richardson, who is a high-functioning, high-performance person, has clinical anxiety. So she can't cope without medication, and she's a wonderful speaker. She's one of these people who pushes herself very hard, and she's about 20 years younger than me. She's female, I'm male, and so it worked out a good collaboration and a good experience talking about anxiety last year. And the book's done quite, I shouldn't say quite well. It's done well. So
I was going to ask, what inspires you to write a new book? How do these ideas come to you? Do you see you're getting too many questions in a certain area, and you're like, you know what, I've got to package that into a book, or is it something that's happening societal?
That's a really good question. And And I guess a lot of people who probably listen to this are entrepreneur as well, you know, sort of wonder where's the next area, or how do we keep producing things? And
Yeah.
I guess it boils down to the simple fact that first I'm going to say I enjoy writing books. It fits my personality style.
That's one of us. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of you. That's right. I mean, I'm one of these people who wake up in the morning and I don't, you know, the first thing I want to do is write something. And as a speaker, I've got to work
again,
hard.
That's one of us.
That's right. Yeah, right. So let's put it that way. And I guess we become nerds in our own area. And I tend to be a nerd in the parenting area. And I try and keep an eye on the market, and I try to keep an eye on where there's gaps as well. So, and one of the areas, for instance, and I guess it's the way I work, is I wrote a book which didn't sell very well, but I made a lot of money from presenting. Was just called Working Parents in 2000. Wow. Terrible title.
Still relevant.
You know, but I learned a lot because I was doing a lot of corporate work in that parenting space, and I learned a lot about how people manage work and play, what kids want. There was a bunch of research came out in the United States around that time where they asked kids what they wanted from parents who are working, around what are the key things you need to do. So that's sort of another driver as well. And I guess with the anxiety one, there's a lot of anxiety in Australia at the moment amongst kids and amongst adults, and we don't know a lot about it as well. It's not something to be afraid of. It's something you actually need to understand, recognize, and then sort of self-regulate. I have an anxious,
and we've all got that level. And funnily enough, and it just clicked to me that prior to, you know, we both know each other through the Professional Speakers Australia. Have been mates for a long time, and you've been and by the way, your stuff didn't really mean much to me until January 2018, when I became a step parent to 4 kids in like overnight. And I'm sure you've got. I'm sure we can do some private consults around all that, mate. But at the end of the day, I've got you on here to share some tips and advice and that sort of thing to parents that might be listening and watching this, right in the middle of homeschooling, right in the middle of COVID-19, the corona cyclone that's hit us all, because families are just forced into isolation, into quarantine, and they have to function. So that'd be interesting to get your insights about that. So it's about you giving that sort of advice going forward, but also selfishly, what can I learn from the master in parenting too? Because I'm a newbie, I'm a rookie at this stuff. But first of all, so everything that you put into your books and that you teach is laced with all kinds of research and stuff. Where do you go to get research? Is there a lot of studies and stuff and papers being written on parenting?
Look, I guess I'm in an area where there's no shortage of research. It's the area around psychology is always is constantly evolving, constantly changing. It's pretty easy to get information, and I guess like a lot of people, I tend to follow different people as well. I'm interested in where certain people go, and you tend to cherry pick. But I do. I think one of the things I will always put out there is the fact that we're pretty evidence based. So I try and make sure that it's evidence based, whatever we put out, and we do. We Parenting Ideas, my sort of company, we supply parenting resources to about 600 Australian schools. So we've got to be spot on because they don't take advice
on this information.
They do. So we're pretty careful as well.
So what's been, this like I said before, the crazy corona cyclone, and people who are watching this and they're forced into this family unit, and now more than ever having to get along and So what's been like in the last 7 days? We've gone to stage 3. is it self-quarantine? Is that what we call it? Or
Yeah, social isolation.
social isolation in the last 7 days. What's been, I guess, the most frequently asked questions of you, being an expert, and I know you hate that term, but an expert in the parenting space?
Look, it's a bit back to the old, where I was about 20 years ago, which is talking about how do I manage my kids' behaviour? How do I get my kids to get on with each other? There's also the other one is my kids are really worried now, and that's the uncertainty is a massive issue as well for lots of different kids. I'm also picking up 2 different questions, depends on which states you're in. So at the moment we're in Victoria, we're in school holidays, so the kids are in a certain mode. There's other states, they're still at school, which is in New South Wales, which is a different set of questions because a lot of them are still trying to homeschool, which is and they're on a different plane. Also, it depends a little bit on so many different questions. So it depends a little bit on family circumstances.
I guess one of the things how do I the uncertainty around when the kids are going to be back to school. How do we cope?
All right, I reckon the first thing is just to get your head around the things that things that have changed. So coping, and what I'm seeing at the moment is there's a lot of anger, there's been denial. We've moved through the stages of grief. We're almost out the other side, which is accept it. Accept it. As soon as you start to accept that things are different, and then we have new terms now, such as the new normal, which is there, but just, accept that it's going to happen. And then I reckon it's almost an opportunity for a reset for many people. And that reset is to see it as an opportunity. And I'm hearing through from different people that I've got an opportunity. I've had some deep conversations with my kids I've never had before. We're seeing some AFL players through the press sort of loosening up and messing around with their kids as well. So I guess it's taking those opportunities that have never been there before. And biggest issue I think also I'm finding is that kids, I know this is a cliche, but I don't mean it in a cliche way, that a lot of kids are now finding time on their hands because they've been highly organised. So they've had very organised lives. They've usually 2 or 3 different adult-initiated activities. We're often saying, get off the screen, so I can't use that. So it's busy. And now suddenly there's a void of what do I do to fill in my time when there's no one keeping me occupied. So there's this rush I'm seeing at the moment to busyness. The questions of how do I keep my kids busy? How do I keep them out of my hair? And that's that normal rush which we as parents or families in Australia tend to have. You see, coming before school holidays, you'll see a whole bunch of articles all over the place of how to keep your kids busy over the holidays. What are the 10 movies that your kids can watch? How do you? And so it's this busy, and everyone takes a breath during the holidays and goes. So all kids' sports are finished. Everything's everything has a break over the holidays, and everyone goes. And then you wind yourself up for the school term again, and when school sports starts, and away you go. So the trouble is now we've wound down, and we're not going to wind out. There's no
how we have we got a threshold beyond 2 weeks?
And that's the issue. And I think the threshold for most of us, and they're going to be working from, is that it's going to go for 3 to 6 months. I think term 2, if you're working terms, as I tend to, is definitely going to be kids at home with a mixture. I know that we're still trying to work out what's happening in schools, but the word is that in government schools in my state, which is Victoria, and your state, Victoria, they're going to be partially open to educate the kids of healthcare workers, etc. And then most of the other kids will be working from home. So we're going to have to get used to this. So I guess some ideas around when I always think of, right, if we can accept that it's going to happen, you've also got to understand that there's a lot of hidden things that have gone on by you being busy. It's a little bit like if you've gone on holidays for a while with your kids, you suddenly realise that the teachers aren't the problem, it's you are, or your child. You suddenly go, a lot of this stuff is in a relationship stuff is sort of hidden. You didn't realise my child's such a was always
Yeah.
keeping me busy or getting under my nose. So some of this stuff's going to come up just because it's not hidden anymore. And that's not such a bad thing. But I think from some points I've sort of round is, I reckon you've got to expect a bit more from your kids going
What do you mean
forward.
by that? What do you mean by that?
You know, everything's gone to parents. Come on, you got to, you know, got to teach your kids. You've got to do this for your kids. It's actually now to step back a little bit and actually say to the kids, more's asked of me, more's asked of teachers, more's asked of everyone in society. Now you're a member of a group here, and we're going to ask a little bit more of you. Okay, maybe if you're in year 12, or you're really focusing, that's going to be bloody hard. Or maybe if you're year, you know, if things aren't going well for you, okay. But as a general principle, you know, helping out at home, expect kids to step up to the plate. Expect kids to keep themselves occupied, and you're not always going to solve their problems for them, particularly around boredom. Expect them when they go do their school lessons that they need to turn up for them and, you know, be on time, etc. for it. So, yeah, there's a tendency to go, poor kids, how are we going to compensate? And the flip side of that is it's an opportunity to kids there's expectation to really to step up. And so I think we just got to expect a little bit more from kids. And the other one I reckon is be mindful of the welfare of others. A lot of families operate around the principle of it's very much individual. We've got every kid has a bedroom, etc. So, and sometimes kids can just operate in their own bubble and don't have to worry about anyone else. But gee, now you're living together, you might, you know, you might not be able to play that music loud or do whatever that is when you want to, because it's going to interfere with dad or mum or another sibling who's got some homework going on. So that more group functioning, and that puts a bit more, I guess, as a parent, you can't really survive, I don't think, in the next 3 months if you've got a laissez-faire, she'll be right attitude. You know, what I call a parent, which is a parent as a mate. I mean, not just, so there's that laissez-faire is about letting things happen. So it's a little bit more about, you're going to have to step up, and families work well when someone's in charge. It's a good idea if it's parents. So don't be afraid to take a lead in that way. Probably don't have to do it in the same old-fashioned managerial ways, but it's perhaps some of us experience from our own parents. But often you need to take a bit of a lead at this particular time.
So what you're saying is there could be you know, we as parents having to skill up in another level of self-leadership, because it's for an extended time, which will hopefully have a domino effect into the kids' their own self-leadership in a way.
Yeah, look, that's a really good way of putting it. I've said I've been trying to work out with my schools, how do I frame this up? And I talk about the family cocoon, because it's not so much lockdown, but, you know, in a cocoon that gives you an opportunity for change. So I do see it as a family cocoon, living in closed quarters for a long period of time. It's going to test everyone's out. It's going to test your patience. It's going to test your communication levels. There's no doubt about that. But
new rules of the house, of course.
And I remember when I first, you know, I remember when I started teaching, it was the difficult kids that made me a better teacher. It was a difficult situations which made me a better teacher. It wasn't the easy one. So I reckon you might come out the other end a better parent, and your kids might as well. And I do think it is about.
Is that a guarantee, mate? Can I write that as
no
a
guarantee.
Michael Gross guarantee?
I wish you could. I wish you could. It's a likelihood. Look, and I guess it's the whole thing it goes back to us as individuals as well, particularly in closed quarters. The kids are going to pick up our moods. They're going to pick up a lot from us. So that really, that notion of looking after yourself and prioritizing yourself is pretty important at this particular stage.
It really is. What about managing the inputs? You know, like there's news every single day right now in the thick of all this. And how do you know, any advice around managing the inputs that both parents and also just human beings and kids specifically are taking in?
If we started at adults, I think you've just got to be, you know, and I'm imagine there's people like me.
Yeah.
I'm now putting my phone down. I don't do anything on my phone on a Saturday. That's a phone-free day because it stops me getting input. So, you know, we can get overwhelmed. So it's up to everyone who's listening to this to know your own limits and stop yourself from being overwhelmed. And all that information can keep your brain aroused and keep it going. And then, you know, how do you shut down? So if you're waking up in the middle of the night and the wheels are spinning, there's a reasonable chance that's telling you need to stop some input. With kids, you need to be really careful as well. Very young kids, they don't understand the images very often. So, you know, coronavirus, which is happening across the world, to them might be happening next door. So you've really got to filter it and monitor it and make sure that the kids, and use language they understand. You know, I've been talking with parents of younger kids that you've got to be really careful how you frame it up, because you don't want the world to be too scary for them, but you want them to be reasonably careful. So
aware.
We use with younger children, we use the word cheeky bug. Look out for the cheeky bug. So the cheeky bug's a bit harmless. It's not the scary bug, it's the cheeky bug. And when kids visit someone, and our grandkids visited us on the other side of a fence, they haven't worked out there's a fence in between yet, but their parents said, you know, they said, why can't we touch granddad? And we use the term because he's got a cheeky bug. He may have a cheeky bug, so you need to be careful. So that's that, using language appropriate for kids. As kids move into get older, they that is later primary school into secondary school, again, you know, talk about the notion of monitoring information. You're getting too much. They want it. They want information though, but they're not always, need to be aware that they're not always terrific processes of information. So sometimes we need to be just a little bit aware that what they're picking up, and challenge that. They may say at the kitchen table, did you know that they've got a cure? A la Donald Trump, they've got a cure in 2 weeks. And then, okay, let's talk about that. But do it in a way which is not scary, but teaches them that that they can control this. That's one of the things that kids, we all want security and they all want safety around this time. So sometimes probably way of talking about that is, I used to get, in the early days, I saw a whole lot of information coming through over the internet around, and I heard a mother say to a child, you know, don't do that. Don't cough. Don't cough. Make sure you cover yourself when you cough, because you don't want to get coronavirus. And her attitude and her language was just making him anxious and scary. So that was probably early days. So we just got to be careful how we talk about it with kids, but also be aware that they can become overwhelmed with it.
Yeah, and coronavirus or no coronavirus, how can we as parents have and really make, hopefully, a concept that I just thought of, you know, constructive conversations? How can we have, like, maybe more with teenagers, you know, later primary kids, like, have constructive conversations that really lead to the growth and development of our kids, so they become more well-rounded, and we can have these sort of mature, you know, conversations, you know, and more importantly, not just how we actually instigate something like that, but how we can build it into our family, you know, routine.
Okay, all right. So you just touched on a thing there. So I'd just like to say, first off, I think it's important that this time the families need a schedule, particularly as kids go back to school, and probably the schedule needs to mirror a school schedule in some way. So they get up at a reasonable time. And you know, work at school times, etc. So I think that's an essential one. Second, another thing I'd do is I'd set up some zones, activity zones, which is make sure there's an area just as where kids can go and learn. It might be their bedrooms. Cool. There's a chill out space. There's a play space, maybe a mealtime zone, and don't contaminate them. So contamination means basically, if you're always fighting at the kitchen table with your kids, it's going to be hard to have pleasant meals at that table.
Yeah, right. How many zones are we talking in there?
I reckon you need about
just looking
4.
around the house.
I reckon you need a chill out zone. Yeah, I know.
What's the little room in the garage that has no light? What zone is that?
That's the cave, isn't it?
Okay,
Is that the man cave?
That's
Or is that
no, that's, I
no.
love that. I love, like last week. We get back to the zones. That last week, everyone, or sorry, the week before, there's all this. People, parents were saying, I've started homeschooling this week. This is the week before the actual term started, and in the first hour, one got suspended and the other one got expelled. so we've got. I
the
love this.
timeout room. Is that,
Yeah,
that's the timeout room. Yeah, all right.
Timeout room was out of the house. So
Yeah,
we've got these zones. I love that idea. That's and to not cross contaminate. I like these.
Yeah.
So how many zones do you reckon there?
I reckon you can have about 4. I like a 4 or 5. You can even have 2 in one. You can, if you've got a small place. So suddenly your working area can be somewhere where a parent does something. So, for example, my wife's doing some sewing as a sewing area, and maybe during the day the kids can work there, and then off it goes and becomes a sewing area. Because it's common sense, but it just works on the notion that, which is a Michael Grinder notion. You're probably aware of Michael Grinder, and he talks about location carries memory, and it's a really strong concept, which is basically the fact that that what you do in a particular place carries a memory over. And so it's a little bit like, if most people of my generation will always be able to tell you where they were when they heard that JFK died. I know where I was when I heard that John Lennon died. I know where I was when Princess Di died, because there's that strong emotional brings back that memory. So the reverse happens. That's why, I've found sometimes I've spoken in churches, and I hate it because everyone goes in, it's quiet. So the behaviour which is expected of a church is sort of, tends to be quite quiet. So and the same thing happens at home, so that you've got spaces where you can, I always say to parents, where's your talking space? And what do you mean? Where can you go to your place where you can, 10 out of 10, every time you go to that space, you can have that chat with your kids. The one that you want to have. And it might be, for some, it's in the car, because, it's not face to face. For some, it might be in a kid's bedroom where they're relaxed and laying down, and you can have a bit of a rub of the back and have a chat. For some others, it may be just laying around in the lounge, because that's where a lot of the chat happens. So try and work that out, and then don't contaminate it by arguments. That's almost impossible in some ways, but an example of that is, in quite seriously, in our house, we used to have the telling off chair or couch.
And so, I hate to be on that.
I was a little bit like that. It was actually, Sam, we need to have a chat. It was always Sam. We need to have a chat. And off we go, and he'd be sitting there going, blah, blah, blah. And it was funny, because once when he was 17, in year 11, we went to the parent-teacher interview, and he knew it was going to be a bad one. We came in the door, and there he was sitting on the couch. I'm ready.
All ready to go.
All ready to go. And it was funny, because as an adult, we as an adult, true story, this one, I asked him if we wanted that couch, because we got rid of it. And he said, "You want the couch?" He said, "No bloody way."
Too many memories. It's anchored.
It's anchored. So anyway, the zones work well around that way. And I think it's also a mixture of trying to get some time alone and time with the group. So being aware that we do, as individuals, we all need time to reflect. We all need time to process. We need some time on our own. And there also needs to be that time where we come together as a family, whether it's meal time. So interesting. I did some work with Teenager magazine, which is now gone under, but they did some research a couple of years ago, and they found that teenagers in 2017, so it wouldn't be that much different, teenagers 2017 identified family TV viewing as a family activity, as a time when they can actually connect with their parents. Now that's
pretty sad, isn't it?
Oh, well, I guess that's the reality of life, because I know, going back 20 years when I started out on this, that TV was a family killer. Don't sit in front of the TV. Now kids are off into different places, and it's the TV which brings people together. And it does. I've always thought with teenagers, if you've got teens, sometimes if you're watching the same thing, it provides fantastic fodder for conversations. And again, it might be bringing up to you, and you sort of mentioned before about talking to this with teenagers. And a lot of good conversations you can have with teens is indirectly, it can be while you're watching something and you turn around
Yeah.
and you go, well, you know, what are your thoughts about that? Or
Yeah.
are they going over the top with all this? Or what's happening at school? Whatever. So you come in a little bit that way. And one of the
Yeah.
things
Why are we watching Married at First Sight? Why are we here? Why do we exist?
what's going on
What has
with me?
happened to our
Watch
lives
this.
to bring us to
Yeah,
this point as a family? We're watching this.
that's right.
I'm just saying.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah, the other interesting thing, which I think you'd relate to this, but it's, and I think a lot of blokes who listen to this will go,
Yeah.
"Oh, I can do that."
Yeah.
There's a high correlation between families that do banter with kids and those who can talk about serious stuff. So if you can have a bit of fun with your kids and you lighten up, you loosen up, and you do the daggy thing, which a lot of blokes do with their kids.
Yeah.
And I know there's women watching this as well, but you'll probably agree that often dads are the king of fun. There's the fun guy.
Guilty.
Guilty. But also will give you permission to talk about some of the more serious stuff.
You're going to level of rapport. Yeah.
Little bit of rapport, and it's not like ha ha ha, let's have a joke. Now for some serious stuff. But if there's a bit of levity around, then you can actually go to those more, you know, personal spaces, but allow kids to have a voice as well.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to call them out on incorrect information, but do it in a way which doesn't make them feel small.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, it's the fact that sometimes when kids have some knowledge, and I think, oh, I know this, and we can pretty quickly take the rug from under them and go, and which is sort of says, well, you're a dickhead. You didn't come with all the information. Next time you go and check it all out. And that'll put kids off. So you've got to be a bit careful from that. So I'm always aware that no matter what age a child is that they tend not to have the full story. And part of adulthood is that we've got to try and help kids process things and go, and that might be from a very early age where you might say to a child when he comes home and says the teacher hates me, or you might think, well, you know, you probably did a couple of things first before you know, start to fill those gaps. And with older kids, then it starts to fill some of the knowledge gaps. You know,
I love all these ideas.
Where did you pick that up?
Again, a lot of it's ideas.
Oh, good. A lot of it's not challenging. It's just being curious.
It's also, like a whole other level of, like, we can take each other for granted. We can take the kids for granted. They can take us for granted. But what I'm in the conversation I've had with you today, mate, it's just about being more conscious of the actual parenting process and being more conscious of the family dynamic, I guess, and pre-planning some things and making sure that we're not just running at a default. Yeah,
and that's exactly right. And when we get busy, and we know this, we're busy people. That's our culture. It's a culture which we live in, and one of the things which gets under we miss a little bit is, and it's not just with kids, with partners. Sometimes it's those deeper conversations. It's actually those deeper connections, and it's that notion of empathy. So empathy is an interesting one, and empathy is basically one of the things I learned with our Anxious Kids book was the fact that what anxious kids want is someone who actually understands that they're anxious. I don't need a parent who actually goes, "Why are you bloody so worried about this?" Oh, it doesn't worry me. What they actually want is someone to actually say, "Yeah, I get it. It's a bit of a worry. Yep, I can understand that." And so empathy happens on two levels. It happens on a superficial level, which is, you know, you can be going about your day. Child comes in, teenager comes in, obviously pretty worried. Have a bit of a quick chat, and you go, "Oh yeah, I can see it really get up your nose." And I can see that by your sister belting you and taking that away, you're pretty upset and you're pretty pissed off. I can understand that. That's a superficial level. You stop, you listened, and then there's a deeper level which takes time to go to, which is like, oh, yeah, I know the same thing happened to me last week when I spoke to Travis Bell, and he just miffed me completely, and I felt like a moron. So if you can go back to a place where you've been at recently, where it's similar one to your kids, and that's that stopping and going, yeah, you know. So, and that's when a deep connection happens. So I think there might be some opportunities for some deeper connections perhaps in families going forward. However, as Brene Brown reminds us, you need to be a bit vulnerable yourself. And I think that when we get busy, we always got the mask on and we don't take it off. And we've probably got more of a chance to take that mask off in these days coming
right
forward.
now. Yeah, 100%. Mate. I reckon. Look, we're going to wrap things up, mate, because I know you are busy, and I reckon we've got to do we're going to do a part 2 to this, because there's so many other things that I want to ask you, and we could go on for probably 5 hours. But I'm really interested in summary. I'm interested in the top tips right now that we can kind of deploy as parents, because we don't know when this COVID-19 thing is going to break, and when we're going to be allowed out as mammals once again to get amongst our herd. So the top sort of 3 tips that we can deploy right now, being stuck at home, being in the family unit right now, so we can all get along.
All right. Top tips are prioritize yourself. So plenty of sleep, exercise, good eating habits, and drink in moderation, all the sort of things you want from a kids. Leave the drink in moderation out, but all those things that we want from our kids, we've got to give ourselves permission to do. The second thing I reckon is really important, and I can see that in my close family, is that if there's 2 of you doing the parenting, and I know it's easy, it's difficult if you're separated, but if there's 2 of you doing the parenting, share the load, give the other one some time away, because you ain't going to be getting much time away in this day and age. And so to make sure you do that each day. And I reckon the third thing, and I've just flipped down to some of the ideas, I think in some ways sleep, if I'm going to go a different one, just make sure you get plenty of sleep, particularly kids. Sleep's vital. So it gives make sure that, I reckon if you've got the sleep happening well, then a lot of other things are going to fall into place. So there's 3.
I wouldn't have expected you to say that. They are some great tips, and I love that second one especially. Is really, there's a whole other conversation that needs to be happening between the parents, if possible, of course, about who's taking over this role. I love that. So some really, I've got the zones. I've just taken all this on personally. You know this, so hopefully all of our other listeners and watchers have taken these tips on board as well. COVID-19, coronavirus or no coronavirus. Amazing tips, mate. How can people connect with you, and what do you got going on at the moment?
All right. So parentingideas.com.au is my website. So Parenting Ideas is our brand. So
fantastic.
If you come in and what we've got there, we've got a number of courses. We've got an Parenting Anxious Kids course, which has been really popular. There are some virtual learning opportunities as well. But the one thing I'd ask people to come in is sign up to our article newsletter. So I'm always writing articles. So you'll get an article come into your, thanks mate. You'll get an article come into your inbox on a regular basis. And when you get an article as well, when you go in and sign up for that, we've created a Life in the Family Cocoon e-guide, so you can grab that as well with a lot of different tools as well. So I love it. Come to the website, sign up, and stay in touch.
Mate, thanks so much for your time, guys. Go and seek Michael out. He's got some amazing resources. He's been in the game for a long time. Author of many books, the go-to expert when it comes to parenting. Been in the media, and as a friend, Michael, thanks a lot for sharing about this much of what you actually know on this podcast too. And I reckon we'll have to do an episode number 2. So guys, thanks a lot for tuning in, and thanks once again, Michael. Cheers, mate.
That's a pleasure. Thanks, mate. It's lovely.